Good morning. I am just reflecting on my first code experience in the ICU. I was working a couple weeks back, and I'm glad that it happened when I was still in training. But your first code kind of shapes a lot of kind of the things that you view as important on a day-to-day basis as a nurse, because you start to think differently. You start to think like maybe what you could have done to avoid it, or what could you have done differently in the code. And that's really good stuff when you can like self-analyze and become a better practitioner and take better care of your patients as a result of the experience you had. Now, I think that every nurse's silent prayer or wish is that when you are put in an emergency situation, that you know what to do and that it comes naturally. Now, this is a twofold thing, because I have a story that there was a time in the beginning when I was a nurse, like at the beginning of my career, when I worked in a different department, and a small emergency happened, and the things that I should have done first did not come naturally, and I feel like I needed guidance and that's the great thing about working with other nurses, is that somebody is going to be there and making sure that the things that need to be done are being addressed. So that's the great part. But sometimes you want to be that person. You want to be the person, especially if you're the primary nurse, that is the one that's just going after it and doing the right interventions for the patient in the moment. But I'll quick tell you what I'm talking about and then jump back to what I was telling you initially. I worked in psych, and my patients started to have an allergic reaction to a med, and they were having respiratory distress, difficulty breathing. And it was just, I thought in that moment, for some reason, it just didn't occur to me, because I deal with so many behaviors on a day-to-day basis where the patient is being dramatic, or the patient is doing something to get your attention, or for whatever reason. And we see that in psych so much. So I think it was twofold. My first thought was not like, this patient is truly in distress. I feel bad about this when I talk about it, because it just showed where I was at developmentally, and it's almost like judgments were underneath the surface without me being aware of it. So it has really given me a window into the type of person that I was in, when presented with a certain situation. Anyway, patient was having an allergic reaction, and the charge ended up helping me. She basically spearheaded everything on how to handle it and put the oxygen on the patient. And ultimately, this whole experience and me just feeling like I didn't really know what to do as well as she did, it made me feel like I was missing some things and I needed to get that fixed. And my solution to that was transferring to an actual surgical floor to try and that's not the right way to say it, but to just strengthen what I already learned in school, and just to use those muscles, because what you don't use, you tend to lose it. And I believe that it's true. In this situation, it definitely applied, because it's not like I didn't know that stuff, but when things don't come naturally like they should, and they need to be coming naturally because you have people's lives in your hands, it's not the best. So I could see that in myself, and I wanted something different for myself and the patients that were under my care. So I did that. And today, looking back on that experience, my first code in the ICU, I feel happy with the way my brain thought to do things, but there's still areas to be colored in. And one thing that has been on my mind, and I want to know what you guys think about this, but we're always learning. You're never going to know everything. But I think that every single place that I've worked, I've known enough to work there, but I have a lot to learn. And it's kind of scary to have that in your mind, knowing like, oh my gosh, so much could happen, and what if I don't know? There's almost always a resource for you. If you know how to get the resources that you need, that's the real skill, because we're not going to always know everything. And that's not realistic to try to pursue. But it's great to have these experiences where it's an emergency and you're working with others, and you just gain so much experience from those situations, because then it's going to shape how you respond in your next medical emergency. So my patient came in from the ER, and it was late in the shift. I was with my preceptor, and it was one of those things where it didn't seem like it was going to be like the patient was tanking immediately, but when you're ICU, it doesn't matter. The patient can tank, and it's your job to fix it. And that's kind of interesting, right? Because they worked med surg for so long, and if a patient sounds like they're about to go out or code or whatever, you don't really want to accept a patient that's not sounding good. Like, it wouldn't be responsible. And sometimes that's hard because you have no idea what the future holds. But this patient didn't really sound like, wow, they're about to code. But they, it was always possible because she had a slow heart rate. And the patient ended up needing, she was on, I believe they had her on a dopamine drip. I think it was a dopamine drip initially. This is a while ago. But they had her on a drip to help her heart rate increase. And that was working. And then all of a sudden, I was actually giving a report to my oncoming RN, and the preceptor that I had was in the room when the patient lost her pulse. She saw her heart rate go down on the monitor, down from 50 to 30 to 20, and then she was looking for a pulse, couldn't find one. Patient was already intubated, and had been sedated from the procedure, so we couldn't really assess her mentation because she was already sedated, so we couldn't use that marker as a way to find out, is the patient conscious, because it wouldn't make any sense. So the pulse is lost, and of course you have to start CPR immediately. So she called the code. Respiratory was in there with her already. I was just thinking, like, the reason this code ended up turning out so well, it was good because the patient was intubated already. So usually a patient will get intubated if they're not ventilating or breathing on their own. A lot of times, especially if they're not conscious, we'll have to intubate them during the procedure, which can be difficult in an emergency because you're trying to do chest compressions, you're trying to do all these other things, and it's just more chaotic. So the reason I say this is it's just better for everyone that she was already intubated. Anyway, I go in there, we get the board under her. In a situation when somebody needs CPR, you always need a hard surface behind the person, because if they're in the bed, like most patients are in the bed, you have to put something hard behind them so you can get a good chest compression. If not, you're not going to get an effective one, and you're not going to achieve the goal of getting that oxygenated blood around the body to keep the person alive. So this person, we got the board back there, we were doing compressions, and my job was to keep my hand on the pulse, and the doctor was showing me how to find a femoral pulse in this type of circumstance when somebody may not have a very strong pulse. So he was teaching me how he would basically almost dig in with both his hands to determine whether or not there was a pulse. And so it was interesting because she would have no pulse, when she lost her pulse, no pulse. But then, during chest compressions, there's an artificial pulse from your compressions. So he would always be asking me when the compressions were paused for those few seconds, do you have a pulse? And there were some times where I did not. And so we had to switch from taking the pulse in the femoral to the neck because couldn't find one in the femoral, but it makes sense that we would find one up near the neck because it's closer to the heart and the fastest in theory. In my brain, I'm thinking about it. The further away you get from the heart, those pulses become faint faster, just because they have that pressure has so much further to travel. And it was hard because there were some times where I couldn't feel the pulse, but the patient still had the pulse, and I think he was wanting me to like search the body, like go up to the neck and stuff. And my brain, learning something new, zoned completely in on that area. So I learned a lot in that moment because there was a strong pulse in the neck, but I couldn't palpate a pulse in the femoral, the groin area. So it was interesting to learn that. But the patient did survive the code. She got a couple rounds of epi, and she got I think then she was put on an epi drip. So it was a lot, but it could have been more. I remember at the beginning of my career, my patients, I guess that is the very first patient I've had in my entire career that has coded, actually, in like 12 years. That was my first code. I've had a lot of rapid responses, a lot of emergency situations, but nothing where the patient ever lost their pulse, and I thank God for that. I think there is something to be said about when you pray and the Lord goes with you and before you and like covers everything. It's my belief that there's something spiritual to say about that He protects. And it sounds interesting, and to many it's not going to sound right at all, but that's my belief, and I'm grateful. So I had that patient the next day, and I don't know what happened to her, where she went, but I got a chance to talk to the family members, and we had some really important conversations. It sounded like that patient wanted everything done. She was in her old age, and it was her wishes that we did all that stuff. And even though many of us wouldn't want to do all these resuscitative, really uncomfortable, to be frankly honest, resuscitation measures, you do it when the patient, that's their wish. That's our job, to basically go with what the patient would want. Yeah, I guess this served as a way to encourage myself, and I think it can be encouraging to other people, especially newer nurses, because of the fact that I think there's this whole pride thing, there's this whole desire to want to be like knowledgeable and be on it. And sometimes you have to have a little bit of grace for yourself. Study up. Do everything you can to prepare yourself for the emergency. Your colleagues will thank you. Your patients will want them to be your nurse, will want you to be their nurse. But don't get so anxious that you may forget something. There's always going to be support around you, for the most part. And when you're in that emergency situation, I've learned, it's never good that a patient will go into an emergency, but you have an opportunity to, it's almost like an opportunity to self-assess yourself and see, okay, do I have any areas that I need to improve upon? What area am I proud of myself for based on this experience that I had, and what areas do I need to maybe study more or practice more or ask more questions about. And I am a huge advocate for that. I think nursing is so great. Like, aside from some of these things that we can experience, like in terms of being short-staffed and being rushed, I have a lot of problems with the way that nurses, the conditions that nurses have to work in. I have a lot of problems with it. But for the most part, I've always been really proud of being able to like help people that way. And I do think that it's really special. And I'm grateful for that opportunity that I can do this. And yeah. So if you're in healthcare, if you're serving people, I want to thank you. Thank you for what you're doing, and know that never think too little of yourself, or, think that your job is not important, because you touch lives every day. You never know who is going to need your touch. You never know who's going to need your care and benefit from what you have to offer. And when you are in a position to help save someone's life, I think we can all agree that that is really unique and special. Anyway, you guys, that is all for today. I'm about to go and clock in for work, and I pray you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.